The boy couldn't have been more than 12. He stood in the center of the auction ring with his arms wrapped around a girl no older than 8, her face buried against his ribs. The rope around his wrists was tied so tight the hemp had bitten into his skin, leaving dark marks that had already started to bruise. The girl's wrists were bound too, looped to his, so they couldn't be separated. "Don't touch her," the boy said. His voice cracked, but he didn't look away from the crowd. "You can do what you want to me, just don't touch her." The auctioneer, a thick-necked man in a sweat-stained vest, grinned like he'd heard it all before. "Ain't that sweet? Brother and sister, folks. Strong boy, good for field work or stable duty. Girls young enough to train up however you like." A few men laughed. Others leaned forward, eyes narrowed in appraisal. The boy's jaw tightened. He turned his body slightly, positioning himself between the girl and the nearest bidder. She was trembling so hard her knees buckled, but he held her upright, whispering something the crowd couldn't hear. Jonas Brennan stood at the back of the barn, hat pulled low, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He hadn't meant to come here. He'd been riding through on his way south, just passing through this godforsaken stretch of Kansas, when he'd seen the crowd gathering outside the old livestock barn. Curiosity got the better of him. Now he wished it hadn't. The air inside was thick with dust and sweat, and the sour smell of too many bodies packed into too small a space. Sunlight leaked through gaps in the barn walls, cutting thin gold lines across the dirt floor. Flies buzzed near the rafters. Someone coughed. A horse stamped its hoof in a nearby stall. Jonas's chest felt tight. It was 1869, 4 years since the war ended, 4 years since the law said this kind of thing wasn't supposed to happen anymore. But the law didn't reach everywhere, and some men didn't care what the law said. $50 for the pair, a voice called out from the front row. The auctioneer shook his head. "Come on now, gentlemen, look at that boy, strong back, good teeth, and the girl's got years of work in her. I'll start the bidding at 75. 60, another man countered. 70. 75. The boy's eyes darted from face to face, searching for something, mercy maybe, or at least humanity. He found neither. His sister whimpered, and he pulled her closer, his bound hands trembling against her back. "SHH," he whispered. I got you, I got you." Jonas felt his stomach turn. He'd seen worse during the war. He'd done worse during the war, but that didn't make this any easier to watch. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 75, going once. 100. The voice came from Jonas's own mouth before he'd even realized he was going to speak. Every head in the barn turned. Jonas stepped forward, pulling his hat off slowly. His boots scraped against the dirt floor. He didn't look at the crowd. He kept his eyes on the boy. The auctioneer squinted at him. "You got that kind of money, friend?" Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. He tossed it onto the table in front of the auctioneer. It landed with a heavy clink. The auctioneer opened it, counted quickly, then grinned. "Sold." The crowd murmured, some disappointed, others already losing interest. A few men shot Jonas dirty looks as they filed out, but no one said anything, not to his face anyway. Jonas walked into the ring. The boy stiffened, pulling his sister tighter. "Don't," he said again, his voice hoarse. "Don't." "Easy," Jonas said quietly. He crouched down so he was eye level with the boy. "I'm not here to hurt you." The boy didn't believe him. Why would he? Jonas pulled a knife from his belt. The boy flinched, but Jonas just reached forward and cut the ropes binding their wrists. The hemp fell away in frayed coils. The girl gasped, clutching her brother's shirt. Jonas stood, slipping the knife back into his belt. "You got names?" The boy stared at him, suspicion and confusion warring across his face. "Eli," he said finally, "this is my sister Annie." Jonas nodded. "Eli, Annie." He looked at them both for a long moment, then turned toward the barn door. "Come on." "Where are we going?" Eli's voice was sharp, defensive. Jonas paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Anywhere but here." Eli didn't move, His eyes were hard, older than they should have been. "Why'd you buy us?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He just looked at the boy, at the bruises on his wrists, at the way he held his sister like she was the only thing in the world worth protecting. "Because no one else was going to," Jonas said quietly. He walked out into the sunlight. Behind him, after a long, breathless pause, he heard two sets of footsteps follow. They walked in silence for the first mile. Jonas led his horse by the reins, letting the kids walk alongside. Eli kept Annie close, one arm around her shoulder. RS, his eyes flicking toward Jonas every few seconds like he expected him to change his mind. Annie didn't say a word. She just stared at the ground, her small hand gripping her brother's shirt. Jonas didn't push. He'd learned a long time ago that trust couldn't be rushed. The road stretched out ahead of them, a ribbon of pale dirt cutting through fields of tall grass. The sky was wide and blue, the kind of sky that made you feel small. A hawk circled overhead, lazy and unbothered. Finally, Eli spoke. "Where are you taking us?" Jonas glanced back. "There's a town about 10 miles west. Got a church, a doctor, maybe some folks who can help you find family." "We don't got family," Eli said flatly. Jonas stopped walking. He turned to face them. "No one." Eli shook his head. "Our folks are dead. Died 2 years ago when the fever came through. We've been on our own since." "How'd you end up at that auction?" Eli's jaw tightened. "Men came through last month, said they were lawmen, said we couldn't stay on our land without a guardian, said it was for our own good." His voice dripped with bitterness. "They took us to that barn, kept us there for 3 weeks." Jonas felt something cold settle in his chest. "These men," he said carefully, "they wearing badges. One of them was, big guy, gray beard, called himself Sheriff Cade." Jonas went very still. Cade. He knew that name. He knew that face. "You all right, mister?" Eli asked, frowning. Jonas forced himself to breathe. "Yeah, I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. He turned and started walking again, faster this time, his mind racing. Sheriff Cade, the same man who'd ridden with Jonas during the war, the same man who'd led the raid on the Collier homestead 8 years ago, burning it to the ground and killing everyone inside. Jonas had been there. He'd been young, barely 19, following orders he didn't understand. He'd watched the smoke rise. He'd heard the screams. And he'd done nothing. After the war, Jonas had tried to forget. He drifted west, taking odd jobs, keeping his head down. He'd told himself it was survival. He'd told himself he'd had no choice. But forgetting didn't erase the truth. Eli and Annie, their last name hadn't come up yet, but Jonas had a sinking feeling he already knew what it was. "Mister." Jonas stopped. He turned slowly. Eli was watching him, wary and guarded. "You're acting strange." Jonas took a breath. "What's your last name, Eli?" Eli hesitated. "Why? Just tell me." "Collier." The word hit Jonas like a fist to the chest. Collier. He'd been right. These were the children of the family Cade had destroyed, the family Jonas had watched burn. Annie looked up at her brother, confused. "Eli." "It's okay," Eli said, though his eyes never left Jonas. "What's it to you?" Jonas didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His throat felt tight, his chest heavy with something he didn't have a name for. Guilt, shame, regret. All of it at once. "I knew your family," Jonas said finally. His voice came out rough, barely above a whisper. Eli's expression shifted. "What?" "8 years ago, during the war, your folks had a homestead just north of here, didn't they? Small cabin, barn out back, apple trees near the fence line." Eli's face went pale. "How do you?" "I was there." Jonas forced himself to meet the boy's eyes. "When Cade's men came, I was one of them." The silence that followed was suffocating. Eli's hand dropped from Annie's shoulder. He took a step back, his whole body rigid. "You." "I didn't pull the trigger," Jonas said quickly. I didn't set the fire, but I was there, I watched it happen, and I didn't stop it. Eli's hands balled into fists. You watched. Yes. You watched them kill my parents. Yes. Annie started crying. Not loud, just a soft, broken sound that made Jonas want to disappear into the dirt. Eli's voice shook. Why didn't you stop them? I don't know, Jonas said. It was the truth, and it was the worst answer he could have given. I was young, I was scared. I told myself I was just following orders, but that doesn't make it right. Nothing makes it right. Eli stared at him, eyes burning with something too big for a 12-year-old to carry. Then why'd you buy us? Guilt. Maybe, Jonas admitted. Or maybe because I'm tired of being the man who does nothing. Eli didn't respond. He just pulled Annie close again and turned away. Jonas watched them for a long moment, then started walking. This time, they didn't follow right away. But eventually, after a long, agonizing pause, Jonas heard their footsteps behind him again. Quiet, hesitant. But there. They reached the town by late afternoon. It wasn't much, just a scattering of buildings along a single dusty road. A general store, a saloon, a church with a crooked steeple, and a sheriff's office with bars on the windows. A few people moved along the boardwalk, heads down, minding their own business. Jonas led the kids to the church. A middle-aged woman answered the door, her face lined with kindness and exhaustion in equal measure. Reverend's wife, she introduced herself. Mrs. Halstead, can I help you? Jonas explained quickly, 2 orphans, no family, needing a safe place to stay. He didn't mention the auction. He didn't mention Cade. Mrs. Halstead looked at Eli and Annie with soft eyes. Of course, come inside, both of you. We'll get you fed and cleaned up. Eli hesitated, glancing at Jonas. Jonas nodded, it's all right. Slowly, reluctantly, Eli took Annie's hand and stepped inside. Mrs. Halstead gave Jonas a grateful smile. Bless you, sir. Not many folks would go out of their way for children that aren't their own. Jonas didn't feel blessed. He felt hollow. He tipped his hat and turned to leave. Mr. Jonas stopped. He looked back. Eli stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. You didn't have to do this. I know, Jonas said. But you did anyway. Jonas didn't respond. He just held the boy's gaze for a moment, then walked away. He made it halfway down the street before he heard the hoofbeats. 3 riders came into town from the east, moving fast, dust kicking up behind them. Jonas recognized the man in front immediately. Sheriff Cade. Older now, grayer, but still the same cold-eyed bastard Jonas remembered. Cade reined his horse to a stop in front of the church. His 2 deputies flanked him, hands resting on their gun belts. Afternoon, Cade called out, his voice carrying across the street. Looking for a man who might have passed through here. Tall, dark hair, bought a couple of kids off an auction this morning. Jonas's blood turned to ice. Mrs. Halstead stepped onto the church porch, wiping her hands on her apron. I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff. Cade's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's so funny, because I got word he was headed this way. He glanced toward Jonas, who stood frozen in the middle of the street. That him. One of the deputies squinted. Could be. Cade dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He walked toward Jonas, his hand resting casually on his holster. Well, Cade said, stopping a few feet away. Jonas Brennan, didn't think I'd see you again. Jonas didn't move. Cade. Heard you bought yourself some property this morning. 2 kids, brother and sister, that true? I paid for them, Jonas said evenly, fair and legal. See, that's where you're wrong, Cade's smile widened. Those kids are wards of the state, which means they belong to the law, which means they belong to me. They don't belong to anyone. Cade's expression darkened. You always did have a soft heart, Brennan, even back during the war. Remember the Collier place? You looked like you were gonna cry while it burned. Jonas's jaw tightened. Cade leaned in closer, his voice dropping. You think you're some kind of hero now, buying kids to ease your guilty conscience? That's not how the world works. Maybe it should, Jonas said quietly. Cade laughed. You gonna fight me on this? You and what army? Jonas didn't answer. Cade straightened, glancing at his deputies. Go inside, get the kids. The deputies moved toward the church. Mrs. Halstead stepped in front of the door. You will not. Cade sighed. Ma'am, step aside. No. One of the deputies reached for her arm, and that's when Jonas moved. He grabbed the deputy's wrist and twisted hard. The man yelped and stumbled back. Cade's hand went to his gun. Don't, Jonas said. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then, from the edge of the street, a voice called out. Cade. An older man stepped out of the general store, a rifle cradled in his arms. Then another man emerged from the saloon, then a woman from the boarding house, then more townspeople, one by one, stepping into the street. Not an army, just locals who decided they'd seen enough. Cade looked around, his jaw tight. You folks don't know what you're getting into. Maybe not, the old man with the rifle said, but we know cruelty when we see it. Cade stared at Jonas for a long moment. Then he spat into the dirt and mounted his horse. This ain't over, Brennan. He rode out, his deputies trailing behind. The street stayed quiet for a long time after they were gone. Jonas exhaled slowly, his hands shaking. Mrs. Halstead touched his shoulder. Come inside. They sat in the small back room of the church as the sun dipped low. Mrs. Halstead brought bread, cheese, and water. Eli and Annie ate quietly, their eyes still wary. Jonas sat across from them, his hat in his hands, watching the shadows stretch across the floor. Why'd you do that? Eli asked finally. Jonas looked up. Do what? Stand up to Cade. You could have walked away. Jonas was quiet for a moment. So could you, back at that barn, you could have run, but you stayed with your sister. Eli's expression softened just a little. She's all I got. I know, Jonas said, and I know what I did, what I didn't do 8 years ago doesn't go away just because. I bought you out of that auction, but maybe, he trailed off, searching for the right words, maybe it's a start. Annie looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. Are you a bad man? The question hung in the air like smoke. Jonas didn't flinch. Yeah, he said quietly, I think I am. Then why'd you help us? Jonas met her gaze. Because bad men can still choose to do good things, doesn't make them good, but it's something. Eli studied him for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached across the table and set something down in front of Jonas. A small, carved wooden horse, worn smooth from years of handling. My pa made that, Eli said. Before he died, it's all I got left of him. Jonas stared at it, his throat tight. I want you to hold on to it, Eli continued. Not because I forgive you, I don't know if I can, but because I don't want to forget what it means to trust somebody. Jonas picked up the carving carefully, like it might break. I'll keep it safe. Eli nodded. Then after a pause he said, Sir, I'll stand tall for my sister. I'll keep doing that, but it'd be easier if we weren't alone. Jonas looked at him, then at Annie, then back at the boy who just offered him something he didn't deserve. You won't be, Jonas said. So let me ask you something. If you were Jonas, would you have opened that door? Would you have walked into that barn, knowing what you'd find inside, knowing it'd drag up every sin you tried to bury? Pour yourself a cup of coffee, take a breath, think about that. And if you're still with me, tap subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Tell me in the comments, what time is it where you are? Are you listening at dawn or late at night when the world's quiet? Because this story isn't over yet. Cade came back 3 days later. This time, he didn't come alone. Jonas was repairing a fence outside the church when he saw the dust cloud on the horizon. A dozen riders, maybe more, moving fast. He dropped his hammer, and ran inside. Eli, Annie, get in the cellar. Eli's eyes went wide. What's happening? Cade's coming back, and he brought friends. Mrs. Halstead appeared in the doorway, her face pale. We need to get the Reverend. There's no time, Jonas said. He looked at Eli. Go now. Eli grabbed Annie's hand and pulled her toward the cellar door. But before he disappeared down the stairs, he looked back at Jonas. Don't die, Eli said. His voice cracked. Don't you dare die. Jonas nodded. I won't. He stepped outside. Cade and his men spread out across the street, forming a loose line. The townspeople had gathered again, but this time they looked uncertain. A dozen armed men was different from 3. Cade dismounted, his eyes locked on Jonas. Last chance, Brennan, hand over the kids and you walk away. No. Cade sighed. You always were stubborn. He raised his hand, signaling his men to move forward. And then a horse screamed. Not from Cade's group, from the east. Another group of riders appeared, older men on worn saddles, rifles slung across their backs. Ranch hands, by the look of them, men with weathered faces and steady hands. One of them, a silver-haired man with a scar across his cheek, rode to the front. Cade. Cade's expression tightened. Cole, this ain't your business. The hell it ain't, Cole said. I branded calves with Jonas Brennan 20 years ago, and I ain't about to let you run roughshod over this town just because you got a badge. Another rider spoke up. We heard what you've been doing, Cade, running illegal auctions, calling it legal just because you got the paperwork. That's a lie, Cade spat. Is it? Cole gestured toward the townspeople. Ask them, ask anyone here if they trust you. Silence. Cade looked around, his jaw tight. His men shifted uncomfortably. You gonna shoot us all? Cole asked quietly, because that's what it'll take. For a long moment, Cade didn't move. Then slowly, he lowered his hand. This ain't over, he said. Yeah, Cole replied, it is. Cade stared at Jonas one last time. Then he turned his horse and rode out, his men following. The street stayed quiet until they were out of sight. Then Cole dismounted and walked over to Jonas. He clapped him on the shoulder. You all right? Jonas nodded, his chest tight. Why'd you come? Because men like Cade don't stop unless someone makes them, Cole said simply, and because you did something decent, figured that was worth standing up for. Jonas didn't trust himself to speak. Cole smiled faintly. Get those kids, they're safe now. Days turned into weeks. Eli and Annie stayed at the church. Jonas stayed in town, taking work where he could find it, fixing fences, hauling supplies, mucking stalls. He checked on them every day. Slowly, carefully, they began to trust him. Not all at once, not easily, but piece by piece. One afternoon, Jonas found Eli sitting on the church steps, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. What are you making? Jonas asked. Eli held it up, another horse, like the one his father had carved, for Annie, so she's got one too. Jonas sat down beside him. Your pa teach you that? Yeah. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip lower. I don't forgive you, Eli said quietly. Not yet, maybe not ever. I know, Jonas said. But, Eli glanced at him, you stood tall for us when it mattered. Jonas's throat felt tight, so did you. Eli nodded, then he went back to whittling. A month later, Jonas built 2 small wooden crosses near the edge of town, in a quiet spot shaded by cottonwood trees. He carved the names by hand. Thomas Collier. Mary Collier. Eli and Annie stood beside him as he planted them in the ground. Annie set down a handful of wildflowers. Eli just stared at the crosses, his jaw tight. Thank you, Eli said finally. Jonas nodded. They stood there for a long time, the 3 of them, as the wind moved through the grass. Years later, people in that town would still tell the story. About the man who bought two kids out of an auction. About the sheriff who tried to take them back. About the community that decided cruelty wouldn't run their county anymore. And about the boy who looked a guilty man in the eye and said, "Sir, I'll stand tall for my sister." And the man who answered, "I'll stand tall for you." Jonas kept the wooden horse on his mantle, a reminder of what silence costs and what standing up is worth. Eli grew up strong, Annie grew up safe. And Jonas Brennan, for the first time in his life, learned what it felt like to be forgiven. Not by words, but by the way Eli smiled at him one morning and said, "Come on, old man, we got work to do." The sun rose over the Kansas plains, dust drifted through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk called out to the wide, endless sky.